Good morning and welcome to this digital summit, which is hosted by the Global Landscape Forum on the topic of large-scale restoration of agroecosystems, opportunities and challenges of participatory research, and in particular participatory monitoring. My name is Jorge Vente and I'm a researcher at the Spanish National Research Council in Murcia in southeastern Spain. Before we start, I would like to briefly explain the idea behind this digital summit that actually originates in the Enable project, which is a partnership in which we developed education tools on integrated landscape management based on sustainable business models. The idea for the summit is also directly related to the PhD research of Raquel Lujan, who's sitting next to me, and which is on the topic of participatory monitoring, which she will be explaining later on in this summit. And she's supported by a grant from the Fundación La Caixa. Well, these two projects, but also many other research and development projects, repeatedly identify multi-stakeholder partnerships as fundamental to facilitate large-scale implementation of landscape restoration. And the idea is that bringing together farmers' experiences and scientific knowledge through stakeholder engagement and through participatory monitoring can help to find the most feasible solutions for landscape restoration, but at the same time create ownership of these solutions by those who have to implement them, which is crucial for upscaling these restoration efforts. Nevertheless, developing these partnerships and involving stakeholders in research in general can be quite challenging and requires careful design of the entire process and of the collaborative monitoring in particular. And therefore, during this summit, we will look at 4 different stories from 4 panelists that will illustrate how collaboration helped them to design, implement, and monitor landscape restoration initiatives from around the world. And it will also indicate how they dealt with the challenges that they encountered in this process. Well, the way this works in a digital summit is that we will first listen to the 4 different stories by the panelists. Then we will have about 30 minutes for discussion and to answer the questions from the audience. The best way, if you are in the audience, to ask a question is by using the Ask a Question box that you can see below in your screen, so that the question comes to us in the most structured way. There's also a chat box, as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, and you may comment and ask questions there as well, but it's easiest if you use the Ask a Question option that's below in your screen. Well, then, without further delay, I will introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Lindsay Stringer. She's a professor in environment and development at the University of Leeds, and she's an expert in environmental policy, governance, and stakeholder engagement, with a long-standing experience in participatory processes around the world. Today, she will share with us some of her experiences, challenges, and recommendations regarding stakeholder participation to support upscaling of sustainable land management by farmers in different countries in Africa. Lindsay, if you share your screen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joris. So I think I'm hopefully sharing the right screen. Is that working okay?
Yep. If you put it in presentation mode, then we can, yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm talking about stakeholder participation to support adoption and upscaling of sustainable land management. Participatory approaches are becoming more and more common within landscape projects. And one example comes from Living Lands in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, which works in a 50,000 hectare area of the Bovenskloof catchment. The major economic activities in the area include goat and sheep farming. And in terms of the degradation that's being addressed, overgrazing is the main driver of degradation of the thicket vegetation that characterises the area. And this results in increasing levels of soil erosion, reduced water retention, and creation of gullies. And all of this is made worse by climate change as well. Since 2008, Living Lands has been combining bottom-up and top-down landscape approaches, hosting workshops and learning exchanges, and supporting research and implementing projects to deliver a change towards sustainable land management through social learning processes. And participation is really at the core of this. And one of our later speakers was involved in these processes and will be reflecting more upon those. And the pictures you can see on the screen show the kind of work being implemented on quite steep and highly degraded hillsides where different restoration approaches are being tested. And this aims to create hotspots around which more plants will grow and retain water. It will build up the topsoil, slow down the water runoff, and promote nutrient cycling and stabilise the environment. So in the pictures, we see things like co-planting, the addition of organic matter, breaking up the soil crust, and so on. Now, we know that from decades of project experiences that successful participation is underpinned by activities that build trust between the different stakeholders, that allow us to identify shared values and purpose, as well as promoting and supporting local ownership and local empowerment. However, participation isn't always easy, and it can be particularly difficult in projects where there's lots of different groups that are involved. So I want to now go on to just provide some quick insights from some work that we've been doing in Malawi, where we did some research on conservation agriculture. And in this research, rather than just looking at who's using conservation agriculture and who's participating in topics, which is what most of the literature focuses on, instead we looked at why farmers stop participating in projects or disadopt conservation agriculture. And we found that quite a complex picture of findings emerged. So we found that the policy and institutional context was really, really important, as it shapes the extent to which stakeholders get a coherent message about what they should be doing. And if you have policies and departments that are poorly aligned, then it can confuse those people trying to implement sustainable land management practices because they're getting so many different messages. In Malawi, there's also a strong traditional value placed on the land, particularly in terms of how you manage it through tillage. So with conservation agriculture projects requesting that people till the land less, we actually found that it led to social conflict in some parts of Malawi, as the project developers didn't always fully appreciate these local cultural and traditional practices, nor the local livelihood context. As a final example, and also underpinning many of the challenges, we found that there was a lack of engagement of the farmers themselves, but also a lack of collaboration between the many, many different groups with the different projects supporting conservation agriculture in Malawi. And this led to some kind of competition between the different projects, as they were all competing for beneficiaries, really. They all wanted to have the people working on their project. So competition between the different interventions in the context of an overall approach that was too top-down didn't really sufficiently allow for the two-way communications and knowledge exchange that's needed to support successful participation between different stakeholders. So together, these things combined and meant that when the projects ended, farmers didn't participate in conservation agriculture any longer. They didn't continue with the good land management practices that the project had brought. So to conclude, involving stakeholders from the very beginning of projects has been shown to be vital, and moving away from a top-down approach is really, really important. But there's lots of questions that remain. Stakeholder participation can be expensive if all the relevant actors are involved throughout. So I'm interested to know how we can better demonstrate that the upfront cost over the short term is well worth it over the longer term. And also there's often little follow-up and monitoring once projects end. So how can farmers and other stakeholders contribute to more effective monitoring, particularly in remote areas or where infrastructure and communications are poor? So I'm hoping we can take forward some of these in the discussion, in the questions, after all the speakers have done their presentations. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much. And I guess Joris will introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you very much. That was excellent introduction. I think with many important lessons for participation in general. So we will move on then to our next speaker, which is Peter Kruger. Peter is a farmer involved in the Living Lands landscape restoration process that Lindsay already mentioned in her talk in South Africa. He has decades of experience with landscape restoration at his farm, and he will explain us how he started restoring his farm and the importance of collaboration between farmers, researchers, and other actors as well. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joris. Also, thank you to Lindsay, who showed some slides of the Bouyaanskloof and the work that we do in restoring natural grazing areas. I'm Peter Clear, and I came from a farming background. I bought the farm where I am at the moment in the Bouyaanskloof, situated in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa in 1977. And so, over a period of 42 years, I've experienced and documented some major changes in the natural flow regime of the Bouyaanskloof river system. The reasons why the area changed was very clear. 200 years of subsistence farming and overgrazing in certain areas has stripped away the vegetation cover, which leads to the loss of carbon-rich topsoil. This leads to erosion, which further degraded the land. A lot of development took place in the 1980s. Cultivation of the floodplain of the Bouyaanskloof River leads to mechanical intervention to protect fields and crops on the floodplain. Flood control channels and berms were bulldozed on the floodplain, which increased the speed of runoff during floods. This leads to the water table to drop and the river start cutting a deep channel on the floodplain. The river system was no longer able to recharge groundwater. Most of these activities was funded and made possible with the help of government subsidies during that time. In 1991, I started to do research and restore certain areas on the farm on my own. In 1998, I was forced to scale down farming activity and stop grazing of natural veld on the farm. My wife and I started the tourism industry on the farm in 1986, which enables us to survive financially. It was a very difficult time for us as a family, and we found it very difficult during that period to survive. It was also a very difficult time to get involved with restoration, because when you get involved with restoration of river systems, you also need to get involved with the communities who live next to the river. I could not do it on my own. But one thing became very clear: degraded landscapes and human poverty goes hand in hand. For many years, I fought the battle on my own. The water table on my farm was the most affected in the area because I was farming downstream from other farms. Therefore, everything that happened upstream from my farm had the effect on the groundwater table on my farm. Just a second. Government departments did not support me, and all my restoration efforts on my side was at my own risk and expense. During the research I've done in the 1980s or 1990s, I began to look more holistically at land use practices in the area. Farmland in the Bouyaanskloof is surrounded by the Bouyaanskloof Wilderness Area, which are the third largest wilderness area in South Africa. It became a World Heritage Site in 2002, and this conservation status put the area in the international spotlight since then. We are also farming in a major water catchment area for Kouga Dam, one of the main water reservoirs in the Eastern Cape. Water security is very important because this dam also provides water to the city of Port Elizabeth. I soon realized that if I want tenancy of the land in the long term, all these factors need to be addressed when looking at the long-term management plan for the farm. Help came in 2006 when the Dutch government got involved in the area after they have invited to visit the area. The program started with a knowledge exchange program where universities send students to the area to do the research and communicate with the farmers and the local community. Several workshops were held with all role players. Students learn from the history of the area, and local people learn more about the research that was done. This process was very important to get the community involved. Institutional development is also important to manage a project like this. Presence and later Living Lands as NGOs was in the beginning of the project managing the student program as well as collaborating with different partners and role players to form the learning network. From the start, it was difficult for farmers to make land available for restoration projects. In most cases, it was a loss of income for farmers from grazing the land and allow restored areas for the vegetation to grow back. There was no incentives available to look after the financial need of farmers to afford change of land use. The cost of restoration, however, was covered through government working for water programs, which main aim was to create jobs and clearing waterways and rivers from alien vegetation in South Africa. In our area, the program was reforestation. We started to plant back degraded spekboom forest. Over time, Living Lands was also successful in securing investment from the private sector to implement restoration projects in the area. One of the main challenges is to develop different income streams for farmers that make restoration a new sustainable business and which have less impact on the environment. So we need a return on investment. Common Land, the NGO from the Netherlands, who is also involved with restoration projects in other countries across the world, become involved in the Bouwjanskloof. Common Land follow the principle of the 4 return model, which are return of natural capital, return on investment, return of human capital, and return of inspiration. New business models and income streams for farms in the area were researched and developed. Common Land, with the help of investors, funded the essential oil project by helping farmers with a loan to establish rosemary and lavender fields and put up a distillery to extract the oil from the plants. Farmers now own 75% of the shares in the new company, the Bouwjanskloof DevCo, which was formed. One of the conditions of the loan to farmers was to make land available for restoration and over a period of time remove livestock from the natural grazing areas. In the short term, it seemed like a high-risk investment, but over time, business opportunities and better, more sustainable future can arrive for the area. Restoration is about healing the earth and transforming it back to a living landscape, which can provide food and water for future generations. As humans, for our own good, we need to take care of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. It was excellent and really nice to hear a story from the ground and from real life instead of people looking at lands of other people. Before we go to the next speaker, I would like to remind the people in the audience, if you ask a question in the Ask a Question box below your screen, preferably, if possible, can you please indicate to which speaker you are directing the question? It makes it a bit easier later on for us to moderate the discussion. So thanks, Peter, again. And we will continue with the next speaker, which is Heitor Mancini Teixeira, who is a researcher at the Department of Farming Systems Ecology at Wageningen University, and also at the Soil Science Department of the Federal University of Viçosa in Brazil. He will share with us his experiences with stakeholder participation from process design to long-term implementation of sustainable land management. So Heitor, you can share your screen and the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm trying to share the screen, but oh yeah, now it's working. Okay. So thank you very much for this opportunity of being here. As said, my name is Heitor. I come from Wageningen University here in the Netherlands and also from Universidade Federal de Viçosa in Brazil. And today I'm here to talk about the process of participatory action research in Zona da Mata, Brazil. And I would like to start my presentation with a question, which is how to promote action research to engage with farmers and promote social change. And to answer that question, I take you to the reality of Zona da Mata in the state of Minas Gerais, in the southeast of Brazil. So Zona da Mata is a very mountainous region, and the three main land uses in the landscape are pasture, grazing land, and coffee systems, which is the main cash crop, and secondary forests. So in this region, we had a long-term collaboration process between farmers' organizations, the university, and a local NGO called CPA. And this long-term cooperation, it was aimed to foster a process of agroecological transition in the region. And this process of agroecological transition, it helped farmers to restore their landscapes and move from degraded pastures, as you can see in the picture, with bare soil and very dry conditions, in 12 years, or a little bit more than 12 years, to transform these landscapes into diversified agroforestry systems with coffee, together with native and exotic trees. And the process of agroecological transition and participatory research in Zona da Mata is an ongoing research. And in 2016, we started a research program called Forefront. And this research program, it involved researchers from different backgrounds and also from different countries, such as Mexico, the Netherlands, and Brazil. And so the main thing that I want to highlight in my presentation are 6 main components that within this process of research that we have been conducting in Zona da Mata, that I identified as crucial for allowing and for improving the process of engagement with farmers and the process of social change. So the first component is the collective definition of research questions, which can be done in a participatory way with farmers, and it's useful to align the interests of researchers and farmers. The second component is the use of participatory methodologies for building scientific knowledge with farmers. So these methodologies, they can be useful not only to generate scientific data, but also to help farmers to understand better their realities and the functioning of their systems. So just to mention some of the methodologies, fuzzy cognitive maps, video making, Venn diagram, and participatory farm typology. The third component is sharing the results with farmers, and this is crucial to build a relationship of mutual trust and respect among farmers and researchers, and this should be done gradually along the research project, so researchers can get continuous feedback and farmers can also understand better and build together the process of research. The fourth component is the integration between research and education, and this can be done, for instance, via cooperation with regular university courses and activities led by researchers. And so there are many different examples on how we did that in Zona da Mata. And the fifth component is strengthening interdisciplinary teamwork, because to do all this work alone by yourself is impossible. So you need a team, and you need also to build capacity building within this team to help researchers to embrace the diversity within a group and to work in collaboration. And finally, the sixth component is the social engagement with farmers and farmers' organizations, which is also crucial to establish this relationship of mutual trust and also to understand better farmers' realities. And this can be done, for instance, in participating in their meetings, in their farmer-to-farmer meetings, working with them in the fields, or so on. So in conclusion, I would like to highlight that participatory action research is effective to engage with local actors, but requires extra efforts from individual researchers, which is not always recognized by academia. And second, participatory action research is benefited by long-term partnerships and a team with researchers from different backgrounds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heitor, for your interesting story from participation in Brazil. So from Brazil, we will be moving back to Spain again. The next speaker is Raquel Lujan Soto, who is sitting next to me. And she's a researcher at the Spanish National Research Council in Murcia and also at the Institute of Sociology and Peasant Studies at the University of Córdoba. Now, she will tell us about her experiences with the design and implementation of participatory monitoring in a large-scale landscape restoration initiative that's taking place in Spain. So I will move away so that Raquel can use this seat.
So, hi everyone. I will share also my screen. Can you do it for me? So I will talk for the next few minutes about the project that I'm actually currently carrying out. It's about participatory monitoring soil quality changes to support the large-scale adoption of regenerative agriculture. So here is the context where we are carrying out the project. Is in southeast of Spain, is the place where you can see highlighting in black. And this is one of the European regions most affected by desertification and by the consequences of climate change. And this is mainly due to unsustainable farming practices, mainly intensive tillage, and also due to the climatic condition of this region that is characterized by, you cannot hear me. Sorry, 1 second. Maybe the... Could you hear me, guys? Just to... Yes.
I can hear, yeah.
Sorry, so then I will continue. There were some people from the audience saying that they couldn't hear. So I'm sorry, I will continue from where I was. So I was talking about that this desertification risk and consequences of climate change were due to unsustainable farming practices, but also due to the climate conditions in the region. So really hot summer, freezing winters, low annual precipitation and torrential rainfall events. If we zoom in, this is how the landscape looks like. So mostly it's a monoculture of almond orchards. And these are the main problems that the region is facing: high soil erosion, low soil fertility, low productivity. And this is leading to high unemployment rates and rural abandonment. So in 2015, there was a group of farmers that started a farmer organization and thought about how could they deal with this problem. And what they thought it was try to mimic agroforestry systems that were traditional in the south of Spain, which are called dehesas, and they include trees, pastures, and animals. So they thought, why don't we do almendrezas, so to mimic these systems, but with a focus on restoring the soil through regenerative practices. So reducing tillage, adding organic fertilizers, and also like keeping natural covers or seeding green covers. But what we were facing, it was that these agroforestry systems are really incipient in semi-arid areas. There is a lack of data, so there are not a lot of results about how these systems work. Climate does not help because biological soil processes are really slow. So then we have slow soil responsiveness to management changes. But the positive thing is that already farmers were implementing practices to restore the soil quality in individually applied or in combination. So here you have some pictures of zero tillage or implementation of green covers or addition of compost and manure. So basically what we did was to meet with the farmer association and to ask for their needs. Based on that, we define research and monitoring objectives. So what was important to do research on who will be doing this research, when and where. When we have this goal defined, what we did was to contact and visit farmers and ask for their willingness to participate. Basically, we had 12 farmers interested, and the second step was to identify, select, and validate the most relevant indicators to assess these soil quality changes. So we did this identification and selection of local indicators that farmers will use through a series of workshops. The result of these workshops was a field guide for visual soil assessment. And here you have some examples of the 14 indicators they selected, for example, evaluating the color of the green cover or the infiltration capacity of their fields. We did the same for technical indicators, but the selection was based on expert consultancy and also on an extensive literature review. The third phase was to evaluate and assess these practices. Here you can see how farmers did it. For example, measuring temperature on the soil or soil structure. In total, they have 14 indicators, and they measure these changes once per season as they selected. We researchers use 17 soil properties and crop leaf nutrients, and we assess these indicators once per year to support on contrast farmers' observations. The fourth phase is sharing of results. We also use workshops and a lot of participatory techniques to enhance this dialogue between technical indicators and local indicators. And this is an iterative process with the previous phase with evaluation and assessment. So after a new evaluation and assessment phase, it will come again a sharing of results. So here are some of the achievements from this participatory monitoring process. First, it was mutual learning through these workshops and participatory techniques. Also, we have a lot of individual and collective records on soil quality. So this allows us to go back in time to see how fast these regenerative practices advance. Also, this allows us to adapt the regenerative practices to maximize their benefits. And also some farmers already adopted practices in conventionally managed fields because of what they saw in their results. Some of the challenges that we are still facing is that even when farmers are convinced and willing to implement these practices, there are low investment possibilities. And also policies lag behind realities in rural areas and this climate change emergency that we are facing. So one of my questions is also, how can we influence policies and policymakers? Second thing is, this is a learning by doing process, so there is a gradual acquisition of knowledge, and we need to strengthen the community of practice to change the conventional beliefs that are deeply rooted. So one of the hypotheses that I'm also testing through my research is how participatory monitoring can enable conducive sociocultural environments that support restoration initiatives. So that was my presentation. I hope you like it.
Stop sharing. Thank you very much, Raquel. So with that, we have come to our last presentation for this session. And that will give us some time, half an hour more or less, in order to answer questions and have some debate around this topic. I've seen there are some questions in the question box. I've 2 questions for Peter, so I will have to bring Peter first back in into our conversation. So 1 second. Meanwhile, we have another question, which is more a technical question. The first question that says, according to a recent study of the Crowther Labs, there's the potential to store additional 116 gigatons of soil carbon, 39% of this in grass and shrublands. What measures are necessary to increase soil carbon? So that's a rather technical question on how to increase soil carbon in grasslands, particularly, and in shrublands. Would you like to answer that? It's not directed to anyone in particular, but
yes, sir.
Yes.
So, well, first of all, for sure, like there is a lot of carbon stored thanks to the roots and to the biomass that grasslands can store. But also, I think it's really important to acknowledge that just through pastures we are not supporting many other ecosystem services. So I think as Heitor mentioned also, like and also Lindsay and Peter, that there should be a combination of practices. And for example, agroforestry systems can combine pastures, livestock, trees, and we can enhance the storage of carbon, but also other main ecosystem services that are really needed in the situation we are facing now with this high desertification risk, not just in semi-arid regions, but also in the tropics. They are suffering this desertification like challenge, and also by the climate change futurist scenarios. So I think for sure grasslands, but not just grasslands. If you could include trees and livestock, that is really important. And for sure, always engaging stakeholders. We cannot do this alone. We need to come with farmers, with policymakers, with researchers since initial stages. I hope I answered this question.
I think so. If there's any addition from any of the other speakers, that's very welcome. Otherwise, I will go to a question for Peter. Okay, Peter, we have a few questions for you. Lindsay, you wanted to say something?
Just add that quite often when we're thinking about storing carbon in grassland areas, it's not just as straightforward as let's just take the animals off the land in grazing areas, because actually that when the animals walk along the land, walk along the grass, when they chew the grass, when they eat it, this can actually help to promote carbon storage. It's not like the animals just automatically decrease the carbon in the soil. So we do need to have some grazing if we are going to increase the amount of soil carbon stored in grassland areas. I just wanted to add that because it's easy to say remove the animals, but actually the animals play a really important role.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for that addition. So Peter, then I have 2 questions for you, not on the grazing, but more on the collaboration and how challenging that can be. So one of the questions is, a shift in land use must be intimidating for many people. So how do you involve unwilling local actors in participatory research? Or in your case, you found maybe difficulties in collaboration with other farmers that were not so open for restoration initiatives. How did you deal with that?
In our area, it was a process to get all the farmers involved. I think as soon as you start implementing projects, it's very important for the farmer to take ownership of that project. So it's a good idea to make them part of the process, the implementing process. I think that's what we lately do in working together with Living Lands on projects on the land, is that they bring the farmer in as a contractor or a subcontractor to do the work on his own farm. In that way, it helps him to manage his workforce much better. And yeah, on some days you work on the fields, and other days you work on restoration projects. So it's a good way to get people involved with any project. It doesn't help you put a project there for farmers to be interested in, but you must allow them to participate, and I think that's an important issue. Is that answering your question?
I think partly it does, but so the question is also, if you find farmer that's not willing to participate, how can you convince these farmers to join the effort? How can you be convincing that people join your restoration initiative?
Well, I think at first another important issue is the whole economy of restoration. So farmers are dependent on making a living from the land. So if they don't have any benefits or income from the restoration work they do, it would be difficult to convince them to become part of a project. So that's one of the reasons why I think Cornland came forward with the idea to develop business models which can replace existing farming income. Because in the end, the farmers will be the beneficiaries of projects that's done on the farm, and it will be a good return on the investment. So I would say quite often restoration, there should be a change of land use or a long-term management plan of the farm. So the farmers must come forward to see how they will survive economically when they start using other practices. For instance, we in our area, we now organically certified, and that's also a process, to go from traditional farming to organic farming. It's a learning process. It's a lot of knowledge that you need to get a hold of, and then you must start practicing it. But I think as soon as you can see the benefits, and also you need that investment from outside to help you to overcome some of the financial needs of your farm. That's very important.
Mm-hmm.
So in our area, we have the regenerative farming program, where Living Lands are actually sponsoring farmers with fertilizers and things that we can build the carbon content of the soil. Carbon, from my side, from the knowledge that we gained over the years, was that carbon is a sponge of the earth. So as soon as farmers start to realize the importance of that, it becomes for them important to implement these projects on their farms. So I think we need to have a proper knowledge, we need to have a proper understanding, and as farmers, what's the area of the place, how the land has forward to build a sustainable future.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think that's very.
I hope it answered.
That's often very much easier said than done, and doing things on the ground really require investment and require an economic benefit for the farmers in order to be able to make that change, which is never going to be easy. That relates a bit to another question that was directed also towards you.
Yes.
Related, how was the experience in diversifying the activity and income from your farm when you decided in the 90s, when your farm was not profitable, to start also a tourist business in your farm? So I understand that's probably a bit along the same lines, or so the question is, how was that experience to shift towards diversifying, combining farming with tourist activities? Was that an easy change, or how was that?
Yes. Yeah, in our area, we were lucky that we actually living in a very beautiful part of South Africa. And so we started off with, my wife started writing articles about Baviaanskloof, and that's how we started to market the area to make it attractive for people to come and visit the area. I think we were lucky in many ways because of what happened in our area, also from a conservation point of view, where the area was proclaimed as a wilderness area, and then later on it became a World Heritage Site. So it's not things that farmers were responsible for, but it was just happening. It was Department of Environmental Affairs which was responsible for the development of the Baviaanskloof wilderness area. So we were very lucky in that sense. Not all areas have the opportunities to develop tourism. So we just found ourselves in a lucky spot there. And
Thank you.
yeah, it took hard work. It took a bit of knowledge. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for your answer, Peter. That's very helpful. I will move on to another question. There are two questions actually. The first one is, and I think they relate a bit to multiple topics that have been presented. The first one is, participatory research methods seem key for success. Why are these methods not yet mainstream in research, assuming they are not mainstream? So I would like to first ask Lindsay and Heitor if they would like to comment on that question before moving on to the next one. Lindsay.
Yes, I think one of the reasons that we know that participatory methods are important, but a lot of the time the magnitude of the project budgets mean that participation can't be included to the extent that perhaps would give the best outcome, because it does take time to identify all the relevant stakeholders, to do that stakeholder analysis at the outset, and then to work out when and who and how different groups should be involved within the process. So yeah, it can be expensive, and I think that is probably one of the main barriers, particularly when, you know, a lot of the most valuable research projects are being done by students, and students just don't have the money and the resources to be able to engage with stakeholders as much as perhaps is possible. On the other hand, you've got large donor organisations, and they have fixed timeframes as well. And so they've got their milestones, they've got their deliverables that they need the project to deliver, and the participatory process can take longer than just going in and implementing a project. So I think these are some of the main barriers. I'll let the other speakers provide some feedback as well, but those are probably the two main points that would spring to mind from my side.
Okay, thank you. I will come back to you with a related question regarding the policy, as you have been mentioning that as well.
Okay.
But Heitor, would you like to reflect on this question as well? So why are participatory research methods not yet mainstream in research?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very important comment. And as I mentioned in my presentation, and also corroborating on what Lindsay just said, I think one of the main problems is that research projects are usually restrained by short-term funding, and also projects are usually not run in the long term, so have a limited time. So that, I think, definitely it's an obstacle, and I think one way to deal with this is to foster the social networks and social organizations that are working with farmers on the ground, and that's what we did in Zona da Mata. So we have this NGO and the farmers union. So we have partnership with them for a long time, and then although researchers change and also funding and new projects start, we always are collaborating with them. So I think that's a way to go. And another thing that I think it can be very problematic is that researchers, they go to farmers and maybe they even do participatory research, but they don't come back to share the results, to discuss the results and the implications of the results with farmers. And I think I can clearly see that in some study areas in Brazil where that happened, and farmers now are really cautious about research and really with step behind, step back, and not so willing to participate anymore, which is very logical, because if you just provide your farm and your work for others to come and collect data, and then you don't see anything come back to you, that's very bad.
Okay, thank you, Heitor, for that contribution. There's a question also for Raquel, and that somehow links, I think, to one of the potential solutions, or at least one of the challenges that Lindsay also identified in her talk about aligning different policy initiatives. The question is actually, Raquel, have you thought of inviting policymakers into the participatory process?
Actually, like the farmer association that I'm working with, they are already having support by regional governments, and for sure, like we thought about also collaborating with policy makers, but I think. And this is why, for example, we are doing also the participatory monitoring to show that researchers and farmers are working towards the same direction, the same that farmers are claiming, researchers are also supporting. And also these, for example, the results of this participatory monitoring process can go also as results for policymakers to help supporting these initiatives. I think we try to do our best also to facilitate communication, to translate scientific data into for example, policy briefs, so we can have a connection with policymakers, and I think that's it. I think it's difficult also, because sometimes we have governments, either regional or national, that change after 4 years. Their budget changes, and the programs that they support also changes. So it has to be, we have to create something really stable to promote also all political parties to go in the same direction as farmers, as researchers, and as the current moment that we are facing. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Raquel. I think that smoothly links to a next question that we have also on the screen, directed to all the speakers. How can this kind of practices be upscaled at regional scale? So should this be done bottom up to involve many more farmers and other stakeholders? Or do policymakers need to get involved, a top-down kind of approach? So how do we balance that? And what is the value of grassroots initiatives that might be small scale, and you might need many of them, as compared to or in combination with more policy-oriented top-down initiatives? Lindsay, would you like to give a first shot at that, related to the challenges that you've been identifying as well?
Okay, yeah, no, I can go first. I think in the work that I've been doing, it's really clear that there's a lot of really good practices in projects that are happening at a local scale. So one of the main things I think we need to get better at is sharing the lessons in terms of what works and what is good practice, not just in terms of managing the land, but in terms of the actual stakeholder engagement process, and in terms of the farmer participation. At the same time, that upscaling can't happen on its own. So there is a need for a top-down approach to be fitted in with this bottom-up approach to help facilitate that process of upscaling. So it might mean that we need a more top-down approach to making information available as to what the good practice is and what the lessons learned are. So I don't think we can say we need one or the other. We need a combination. And I think the challenge at the moment is really working out how to get the most effective combination between top-down and bottom-up across different contexts. I'll stop there and let the other speakers wade in and say something as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. Peter, I would like to ask you, what is your idea on this and your experience in this? How important has policy help and policy involvement been for the initiative that you're working on in order to get it going? Has that been crucial, and as compared to just farmers who get motivated and start doing things, or are both equally important?
Well, I think policymakers also need to understand what's going on the landscape. I don't think they always have, you know, politicians and people who aren't understanding, because they are the people who make the changes in laws and whatever in countries. So, for instance, how are governments spending that money ends up to? I think policymakers must start to manage the restoration programs and support it worldwide. And that's government that must make that decisions and the way they spend their budgets. Everybody starts paying for all the sins of the past, you know, for climate change and everything. We can't keep farmers responsible, or one generation of farmers responsible for all the damage that was done in the past. It's difficult. We can't absorb that cost to make the changes. So we need the support of everybody, and therefore governments or policymakers are also important.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I want.
I will. We have a last question coming in, which is stated as follows, and I would like to ask maybe that I talk and give a first shot at that question. The question is: in many countries, societal space for science is under pressure. Can participatory bottom-up research methods help in that regard, do you think?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Well, I think yes, and I think we need to create more dialogue in science. So we need to communicate more with civil society in order to increase this societal space for science that is being mentioned. And I think that can for sure be improved by participatory bottom-up research methods. And I think it's important for researchers to participate in meetings with policymakers, with farmers, and such meetings, they have to be organized bottom-up, and they can have an influence on policy. So for instance, in Brazil, like in the agroecology movement, we are organized in a local scale with farmers. So for instance, farmers unions, NGOs, as I mentioned in my presentation, but we also have organizations that go to regional scale and even to national scale. And within, for instance, in national scale, we have the National Association of Agroecology, and more than 70 movements and organizations are part of this, including the Scientific Committee of Agroecology. So then all these movements are together, and that promotes dialogue, and that can also make pressure on policies. So for instance, due to this movement, Brazil was the first country in the world to have a national policy on agroecology, and that was very, very important for keep doing research with agroecology and keep doing participatory research and also to involve farmers and other local stakeholders.
No. How can we assure sustained involvement of stakeholders in landscape restoration and generate trust building with grassroots communities? So really get this, as was mentioned by some of the speakers, make this a long-term process and make sure that it is long-term and that it does not depend just on external funding that stops after 2, 3, 4 years. But how can we make sure that this is really something that can be longer-term implemented?
Well, actually, I think firstly, like to keep a long-term engagement of farmers in research and in landscape restoration, I think they should see a benefit. Like I think we cannot, as Peter mentioned, like I think it's really hard to put all these responsibility of decades of unsustainable farming on just one generation of farmers. And as I mentioned, there is not a recipe, but I think as already Lindsay and Heitor mentioned, there are some steps that can help that involvement. Firstly, is understanding the context, the reality where we are gonna work. Involve farmers in initial research states, keep them as not as an object of study, but as a subject. You know, that they own their own actions, and also have them involved until last step. So for sure, setting of results, taking them into account of what they have to tell. At the end, they are the ones managing their lands for them, but also for all of us. So that's it. I think there is not just one silver bullet. So complex problems, they don't have a simple solution. But I think also to learn of previous research and of previous projects of colleagues, of people that have been working in participatory research can help to speed up this process and also to keep this long-term engagement.
Okay, thank you, Raquel. Maybe one of the other speakers would like to comment on this, Lindsay or Peter, on this question. So how can we assure sustained involvement of stakeholders in landscape restoration and generate trust building? Or always clear?
I think what's probably the most important issue here is knowledge. The farmers must have the knowledge from elsewhere because they don't always have the time to do the research on their own. So it's always good to do research in an area by universities or whatever to exchange knowledge to the farmers. I think that's one of the main things. And then from there on, it's to look at the area and to see how you can build a new economy or a long-term future for this place or for any place on the planet. How you can make your farming practices better to increase your income and to have less cost and less impact. So that's the sort of knowledge that we need as farmers.
Thank you. Lindsay, you wanted to add something?
Participate.
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Then we have one last question before we close the session. Let me scroll back to that, which is directed to Heitor. Why do you stress the link between research and education with regard to participatory action research? How do you view this in relation to the other components you mentioned?
Yes, thank you for the question. The answer to that, I think there are two main answers. One is that we need professionals and we need scientists that know how to work with participatory methodology, because that we are not taught that usually at the university. So we need to learn how to do that in an efficient and successful way. And I think integrating research and education can help to train new people to perform participatory research in the future. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I think involving students and connecting education and research can also be important, for instance, to help to create better integration. And students, for instance, they can help researchers to collect data on the field. So we can use these courses also to train students, send them to the field so they can collect data and we can see the potential and the impact of the research.
Okay, Aitor, thank you very much. Well, if there are no further comments or questions in this respect, I will finish this session, this DLF Digital Summit. And before that, I would like to thank very much all the speakers for their very interesting contributions and their availability to be part of this. This has been very stimulating, at least for us. And also the audience for being with us and asking their interesting questions. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye-bye.